Hello and welcome to Bread and Rosaries, the only podcast guaranteed to get you into the VIP area of heaven. I'm Ben Molyneux Headington, and I'm joined today by Adam Spears. Say hi, Adam.
Hello.
And today we are joined by Fran Lock. Fran, we've already tried recording this once and it went wrong, so tell me again, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little bit more anxious now, but
I was going to say,
are
you less good than you were 20 minutes ago when we tried this the first time? That's
a little bit moving forward in cautious optimism. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Radical hope. That's what we're doing.
Exactly.
Fran, you are a poet and you have recently released the wonderful collection Love is Stronger Than Death, Mary Magdalene and the Insurrection of Jesus. Adam and I have both read it, and I embarrassed you on our first attempt by being effusive in my praise for it, and you're going to have to sit through it again, I'm afraid, while I say it is very, very good.
Well, we've already sat through your jokes twice now. So.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, because it wasn't my best intro to start with, and having to do it twice. But the important thing is that the collection is fantastic. Really very much up the alley of, if you enjoy this podcast, it's about a lot of the same stuff, has a lot of the same ideas in it, but probably smarter and better put than we have ever managed. But yes, I said earlier, if you're listening to this right now and you trust us, go and buy the book immediately. Don't even listen to this podcast. Click on the link in the description, buy it now. If you need a bit more convincing, then have a listen, and we're going to talk about the collection a little bit, and hopefully by the end of it you'll be desperate to buy it. And I did say as well that I'm an ebook reader, but I think it's well worth getting in the physical copy. It is a kind of beautiful book with these wonderful illustrations in that really, really add to the whole thing. So my recommendation is to buy it immediately and buy a physical copy. The link will be in the description. Fran, I promise we will not embarrass you again. Do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Fran Lock, the owner of a crap top that just ejected off, shoved me out of the podcast. But I'm back. I'm fighting back. Keep my mind in hell and despair not. I am a poet, essayist, and editor at the Radical Arts and Cultures Cooperative Culture Matters, where I edit other people's poetry collections, and I ramble on about socialist issues. That's my whole deal. There you go.
Communism.
Yeah, you're going to hear a lot of Adam's very happy soundboard. I've never seen him as happy as when he gets to hit a soundboard button.
I'm sad I don't have one.
Yeah, I think one person with it is bad enough. I don't think everyone needs it. That would be chaos.
Use it in the classroom. Every time my students said something that was particularly awful, I could just
crush it down.
Effects. Yeah.
There are some wonderful things. So I walked into, because I teach sometimes, and I walked into a classroom one day. It was not my classroom, but I was teaching there one day, and I found on my desk a genuine, actual tribble on my desk.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I don't know what that is. I'm sorry, I've missed something here.
Ugh, you sicken me. I'm not even going to tell you what a tribble is. If you know what a tribble is, write in, email us, and we'll send you a sticker or something.
Yeah, with the subject line, Ben is an idiot, email in.
Ben's in tribble.
Ben's in tribble. The trouble with triples.
So, moving swiftly on from awful pun work. Fran, your introduction talks a little bit about yourself and your kind of beliefs and positions and all the rest of it, and I found it really interesting and thought-provoking. So the two kind of big ideas of this podcast are Christianity and politics, which are very big ideas, but I thought it might be helpful for you to kind of situate yourself in relationship to those as we start.
Yeah, those are huge. So without wanting to sort of too forcefully nail my colours to the mast, I suppose that I have increasingly begun to describe myself as a Christian communist. This is soundboard time again. I want the da-da-da-da.
The rocket system you call communism.
Adam, you should have been so there for
Come
air
on,
horns.
Adam, come on
Sorry.
now. Air
Sorry.
horns. But actually, I mean, in all seriousness, I think that I describe myself as sort of person doubt in all things, and faith is something that I've been kind of grappling with and moving into for, you know, sort of most of my life. I came from a kind of Catholic heritage. Used to describe myself as like sort of phenomenally lapsed, but now I think I'm coming to a sort of a more sort of like holistic kind of like understanding, and a kind of more healthy, less dogmatic relationship with faith. I tend to think I have faith, I don't have a faith, if that makes any sense. And I think, you know, as I've got older and I've really sort of thought about things a bit more, and I've kind of touched base with sort of my radical kind of foremothers, people like Julian of Norwich, and I've found that kind of that way to approach kind of faith and to spirituality and belief. But mostly I just believe in the profound radical socialist message of Christ the man, and his kind of like, yeah, there you go, that's some air horns. And his kind of like this insurrectionary, this power of love, and just this kind of like that love is this kind of like practical, aggravating, revolutionary force on earth. And I still that idea shouldn't be so astonishing to people. It shouldn't feel so challenging, and yet it does. And I think I'm moving into a relationship with that idea, with that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. A kind of vague in a very helpful way, if that makes sense, you know? Like actually vague in the sense that I got a real sense of where you are wrestling with your tradition and with faith and all these things, without you saying, I believe this, this and this, therefore I believe this and this. You know, it was a much more honest, potentially, way of phrasing it that I found really really helpful. So yeah, I really like the way of thinking about things.
It's quite gentle, actually, as well. And sometimes you need to be gentle with yourself when you're exploring where you're at now in terms of faith, in terms of how your faith interacts with your politics. And I don't mean gentle in a kind of meh kind of word, but actually being gentle with yourself and with others to an extent. I mean, I think what I enjoyed actually when we get into your poetry is that it's not all gentle, but but no, the sort of starting off point there felt to me like a really nice way in, actually.
Well, I'm really glad. I mean, I think I wanted to be sort of like purposefully quite vague in the introduction, because I didn't want to sort of be like sort of beating people about the head and neck with my ideas. It's not really an evangelical exercise in that sense. It's just about creating room. It's sort of saying, well, what if, particularly to a lot of our friends and comrades on the left who, you know, have this kind of like militant atheist mindset, and particularly a lot of my friends who kind of like came up in the church and who had very, very difficult experiences, you know, with the Christian brothers particularly, and felt really alienated from that space of faith. And so I wanted to just kind of offer them this sort of like a gentle provocation, this kind of like, well, what if we thought about this in a different way? And what if the starting point was love and was radical love? Yeah, what then?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's I like the gentle provocation, you know, not a in your face, yeah, think about this, idiot, but like actually an invitation to consider something afresh in a constructive way. I think it's really nice. And I really liked your description of yourself as a person of doubt rather than a person of faith. That's really a lovely way of putting that, actually.
Thank you. I think, yeah, I mean, because I think doubt is kind of, for me, it's an ethic. It's a sort of, we sort of owe the world doubt. We sort of like not to sort of write everything off with the cheesy little goes without saying. I think we sort of, that's the care we owe to other people. Is to sort of to really think about and interrogate our own positionality and our own beliefs and our own thoughts constantly. It's the work, it's the life's work, you know.
Sometimes there's a paradox in that, because I find myself having arguments with certain people I know who are a bit more fundamentalist in their Christian faith, and I almost sort of end up in this weird place of being very sort of strident in my doubt. You know?
Yes. Yeah, this is the struggle is real. I can absolutely relate to that. And I think that I don't know. I think sometimes when you're in an argument with people and you find that the ridiculous position that you're shouting at them, you're just like, just be more open-minded, damn you. In the most kind of like, angry, dogmatic way that you possibly can phrase it.
So, and sometimes I was having this discussion with a family member recently that sometimes you can be as open-minded and as gentle and as kindly doubting as you can possibly be, but there are red lines, and I know for me that I've had red lines with people that have been close to me, obviously not naming any names, because of their response informed by their faith, apparently, to everything that's going on in Palestine at the moment. And I found, to me, if your Christian faith leads you to anything other than condemning a genocide, and like my partner, I know she probably didn't invent the phrase, I'm sure, but she has this wonderful phrase that I've sort of taken on board, where she'll say, well, I want him to eat, but not at my table.
Yeah. I really like that. I really like that. Yeah, you can have a sort of like general compassion and care for everyone, and you want them to have rights and freedoms and love.
Yeah.
But you don't want them within 5 feet of you. Yeah, I have that relationship with a lot of people now. Increasingly as I get older.
You get older and you take less shit. I think that's.
I think so. Yeah. I think so.
I think there's an element of your identity, I guess, as well in the sense of, like, I don't know, as a cishet white man, I can potentially do more of that work of, if people are being homophobic, transphobic, racist, sexist, that is not a personal attack to me. And I am therefore in a position, and it's not just your identity markers, it's about, where you are as a person, mental health, your kind of, I don't know, sense of self, whatever it might be, or just how much patience you have on any given day, but actually about recognizing that there are times where some of us might engage with some of this stuff where it is helpful and effective, but that is not a, I think the church likes to put people, it's the classic thing about asking people who've been abused to be the first to forgive, right? Which is just a horrific thing. But actually recognizing that I might be able to practice grace or, trying to work with people, change minds in a way that it wouldn't be safe, appropriate, or healthy for another person in a different situation to do that, right? And I think there's there's different parts of the struggle, right? And we need to protect people as well as advancing the cause.
Yeah, that well said, I think. And I think absolutely allowing people, for me, it's about allowing people the space to be wrong. And I think, and to still be heard and to feel like they've been heard, to say, no, like, you're wrong, but I hear you, particularly when somebody is talking from a space of kind of confusion and pain. I experienced a lot of that relatively recently with, a lot of my comrades and colleagues' responses to, LGBT plus rights issues. I found that quite woeful and upsetting. But still to be able to say, I will hear you, and I hear where this is coming from. You're not right, but I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah.
To allow that person that space. And, I'm strong enough, I can do that. That's work that I can do. And having realized that that's work that I can do, and I don't have to get upset and angry and give that back, that I might be able to just change even one person's mind, just a fraction. And it's kind of like, it's life's work. It's life's work. But you kind of do it because it's worth it.
Yeah. It's actually a conversation that I was having just today with someone, actually, and it was to remember that sometimes anti-fascism isn't punching a Nazi in the face. It's actually going for a beer with them and having that conversation without anyone else there, without being recorded, but to talk to them and try to plant those seeds of doubt. And some people do wonderful anti-fascist work just by befriending those people and gradually undoing the nastiness that's been given to them by other people and organizations.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I used to, because I used to do some stuff in schools, largely with, white working class boys or with boys from traveller backgrounds. And some of the stuff that came out of these kids' minds, that sort of like that terrible kind of anti-black racism and the misogyny, the absolute misogyny. But you realise once you talk to them that what's driving this is they're not stupid, and they're not mean, and they're not unkind. They've been left behind and nobody has listened to them. And the only people who are listening to them are feeding them a line of bullshit, an extremely strong line of bullshit that tells them that rights are finite, and yours have been taken by the black and brown people or by the women, And because those are the only people that seem to be, they're not really listening. They don't really care. They're the only people that seem to be listening to them. It's something to hang on to, because otherwise the world is just disorienting chaos in which you are being repeatedly kicked in the face.
I've worked with young people for quite a while now, and it's a real skill to be able to facilitate that space, because people have reactions to and particularly we work with kids in care, and they will say stuff to get a reaction, but also actually they have been fed a steady diet of bullshit. The Andrew Tate and the associated stuff is popping up on the social media and whatever, and actually to have the ability to facilitate a conversation rather than just go, you can't say that, it's wrong, but B, also to have there are a lot of people that I've seen where they know racism is wrong, they know misogyny is wrong, but actually don't have the knowledge or haven't kind of developed their thinking to the point where they can have those conversations at a level anything beyond that is wrong, you can't say that, don't say it, and actually have an unpicking of the arguments that they're being fed is quite an important skill, and something that actually I think we can definitely prioritise more, both in professional settings with young people, but also as leftists.
Yeah, definitely. And it takes, the thing about it is also it takes time. It's not going to be done with a declarative speech act on Facebook or on X or Blue Sky. It needs that kind of that one-to-one, that kind of like that building a relationship that isn't just sort of like parasocial shouting at each other.
Yeah. Shall we move on before we talk a bit more about the book and related stuff? Shall we start, as we always start, with what else is on my mind, Grapes?
What else is on my mind, Grapes?
And this week we've been talking about sport a lot recently, which, as I've said before, is not necessarily matching our audience's level of interest, but there's been a couple of interesting stories come out recently around Palestine solidarity in football. So the first one that I saw was Clapton Football Club, who are kind of a London community-owned football club that's done a lot of stuff, kind of taking strong, good political positions as a football club. They had a women's team final that got abandoned halfway through. Because there were both sets of supporters had flown Palestine flags, and there were also some trans solidarity banners.
And a banner that said "Show Genocide the Red Card" in the other set of fans, I think, as well, which is wonderful.
And it was being played at Maidstone United's ground, and an official for Maidstone said that the game couldn't continue unless the banners were removed from the ground, and fair play, both sets of players basically said, no, our fans are here, they're gonna have the right to say, because it also said we can finish the game behind closed doors, and they refused because they were like, we're here to play in front of our fans, that's what we're here to do. And the game got abandoned halfway through because there were expressions of solidarity within the crowd. And I want to be really clear that there was nothing that even the most bad faith reading could not take anything there as anti-Semitic or offensive in any way. It was Palestine flags. It said "Show Genocide the Red Card." There was something about trans solidarity as well.
But Ben, I think you will find that is blood libel.
Yeah,
so.
Well, you know what? I'm underestimating how bad a faith reading you can achieve, but not a serious reading, I guess. I found that really fascinating. And then related, Arsenal are currently being sued by their ex-kit man because they sacked him after he made a social media post in support of Palestine solidarity. And And what I found really interesting is that there was documents have come out where Arsenal has specifically said, we are not saying that anything about this is anti-Semitic. We don't think this is offensive in any way. We just believe this represented a reputational risk to the club, and that's why we let you go.
After 22 years working with the club as well, I think, if I remember rightly.
Which I don't imagine is going to go well for them in court. Because
probably not.
Yeah, if they'd have said, we thought this is offensive, they had a bit more of a leg to stand on. But actually, he's done it on a personal social media account and not linked to Arsenal in any way. And he was kicked out after 22 years there. There's been a few other, at the bottom of this article we're reading, there has been some stuff going on with Dagenham and Redbridge actually fired their director of development engagement over a similar issue, an Instagram post about Gaza, and they had to apologise and I believe settle out of court. And then Mainz, the German club, fired Anwar El Ghazi, one of their players, again for Palestine support. And what I enjoyed about this is that he sued them, won, and they gave a bunch of the money to Gazan relief campaigns, and then put out a statement saying, I hope the club is happy that they are making life a little bit more livable for the children of Gaza indirectly. But there's a real, all these stories come together, and actually I thought it was really fascinating how we are seeing an active push against Palestine solidarity at all levels of football right now, in a way that, is an actual free speech issue, unlike a lot of the so-called free speech issues we hear about.
This is obviously representative of something that's appearing across society as well. I was reading a story that's about a couple of, I think one was in her 70s and the other was in her 50s, but a couple of sort of anti-apartheid, anti-genocide protesters in occupied Ireland who had put stickers on a cash machine and were arrested for criminal damage. And it was like, but the cash machine was still usable.
Yeah.
They hadn't broken it. There was no damage done. They just put some stickers on and were arrested for it. But of course, we all know that, obviously all coppers are bastards. The police are bad wherever you go. But in occupied Ireland, it's something else.
Isn't it just? Yeah, I was going to say that totally scans. That's Ireland for you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just,
I obviously, to become a police officer, you have to. There's an interesting thought process that either has to take place or no thought process whatsoever. But to become a police officer in the occupied 6 counties, I can't even imagine the thought process that goes on there.
I think there is a level of cognitive dissonance, because you hear people who talk about, well, they sign because they want to help people. What have you seen? Where have you seen? Yeah. What have you encountered that led you to believe that was the best way to go about doing that? Because there are all kinds of wonderful jobs that you can get as a teacher, as a social worker, as a nurse, or as, a person driving an ambulance that's helping people. You can work at a food bank and help people. You don't have to put on a uniform and harass civilians. It's not a thing that needs to happen.
No.
I'm going to jump in here before Adam the Anarchist starts saying that actually teachers and social workers are cops anyway.
They want us to be,
which they are.
True. they want you to be.
I can see the anarchist light in your eyes. Yeah,
it wasn't that I was going to say. Actually, in the last couple of days, has had the police around so that she can document the abuse that she got from her ex-boyfriend. But these police officers came around, and this police woman, as she's explaining what's happened to her. And it, legally, by the way, it is abuse, right? This policewoman said to her, it doesn't really sound like abuse. It just sounds like you had a bad relationship.
Oh, fucking hell.
That makes me nothing but sad.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah.
My main experience of the police is at work, where you can literally go, I have a vulnerable young person missing. I know exactly where they are. I can give you the address. Will you go and get them for me? And I'll go, yeah, we'll get round to it. We get round to it. It is, absolutely mad. And I am required, if it was me, I just wouldn't fucking bother calling them. But obviously I don't have a choice about doing it. But, you do it knowing that it's an absolute waste of time, that they're not going to do anything to help. And they will often make things worse.
Yeah.
It's a really great situation.
It's a wonderful system, and I think that there's so many kind of like sort of like baffles and walls that try to force you into this particular position. So you have to interact with them, and you have to use them, and you can't circumvent that or go around them. You need to interact with them, and you sort of legitimate their authority every time you do that, and it's incredibly frustrating. It's just very, very frustrating.
It's the Simpsons line about, Assistant Chief being, I thought you couldn't do anything. Oh no, I can't do anything to help. I can do things to make your life worse.
Yes.
So, shall we transition to talking about the wonderful book that we're here to discuss today? And I was going to start by picking up on the fact that a lot of the kind of poems kind of centre around Mary Magdalene. And you touch on this in the introduction as well, but I'd be interested to hear kind of what drew you to Mary Magdalene as a figure to kind of write poetry about, I guess.
I mean, I think Mary Magdalene she's this incredible kind of like, she's this incredible force in scripture. And she stayed with Christ during his moment of like greatest crisis and most pressing danger. And she stayed with him like throughout the crucifixion. And it's that, I think, where I'm thinking about, because of lost people and people to state violence, and thinking about what that was like for her as a woman to experience this profound loss. But then she's also, she's the first person to see Christ resurrected. She's, and yet, because I'm a sort of amateur medievalist, so I kind of like went back and looked at all the sort of medieval legends, because she was very, very popular, wildly popular in the medieval period. And I expected all of this Mary Magdalene material to be like really radical and exciting. And it really wasn't. And it was so disappointing to me that this kind of like this pivotal figure, she just becomes she becomes this prostitute. She becomes a person who is kind of like put beyond the pale. Like Christ would never interest himself with this penitent kind of prostitute. And I think that was really, really used to kind of squash women back in their box, obviously. But also to sort of like remove Christ from the sort of other areas of human concern. So if he's not a man who has this like profound relationship with a woman, a sort of like bodily and spiritual relationship with this woman, then he's sort of moved outside the kind of like the compass of human concern. So he might not also care about social justice. That doesn't matter. Or sort of like, redistributing wealth, or maybe that doesn't matter to him. And to me, like, Christ's sacrifice is radical precisely because he's a man, because he's this human person, because he is a possessor of this one unique, precious human life, right? Otherwise, the sacrifice it's not as profound if he's this abstract kind of woo-woo spiritual figure. It's also that he's a man that it matters. And for me, kind of thinking about Mary Magdalene and her kind of like her ministry with him, and her friendship with him as well. It's not just to say that they were lovers, because I think that kind of like reduces it a little bit. It was a profound kind of like a profound friendship and a kind of lifelong partnership and teaching. And so just sort of thinking about that really made me want to sort of write the book. And I kind of got there thinking about the sort of the women in my own life who had cause to be extraordinarily strong, and women particularly in occupied Ireland as well, who sort of struggled. They had partners, husbands, sons in jail, suffering outrageous abuse and treatment, being killed, and how they had to carry on. So I was thinking a lot about that, and I channel, I think, a lot of that in the book as well. But yeah, I think she's this incredible. She's an incredible figure who's been kind of sidelined, horribly sidelined. And I just wanted to celebrate her a little bit and bring her back, kind of recuperate her.
Something I really enjoyed was that kind of almost playful approach to her in there, recognizing that there's this history of actually conflating different Marys and creating this one figure and kind of smearing her as a prostitute historically. But something actually my wife and I have chatted about is this strange situation where on one level you want to say, well, actually, there's no evidence she did sex work. That's a kind of started as a mistake and became this misogynistic thing. But then also there's something really powerful about the idea that Christian tradition centers a sex worker, right? And a kind of, actually, how do you grab, there's a misogynistic way of saying, oh, she wasn't one of those filthy women like that. She was actually all pure. And I think I really like your playful approach that kind of allowed you to almost have both of those things at the same time and kind of say, look, this is a complex tradition and story, and we can play with these ideas and actually take, what we need to from the multifaceted kind of reality of both the person and the tradition around her.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really important to me that I didn't want to, because when people get things wrong with, when medieval people get things wrong, it really annoys me. It's one of my faves. One of my really uniquely niche, and it doesn't say that in scripture, shut up. I get very, very angry. I think that's like my slightly autistic nature coming through there. But also it was like, but what if? But also, but what if she was a sex worker? And I think I have this bit in the book where it's sort of like nobody who experiences, talk about Christ, kind of saying that nobody who loves is filthy. It's not that converting or finding your faith makes you clean. It's that nobody who has ever loved, nobody who experiences love, no matter what they do, is filthy, because we're all fallible. We're all equally fallible, or equally fact. But if your first action is always love and also that reaching towards the other person, then you're all right. And I think that, it's one of those ideas that it's so incredibly basic, and it seems so self-evident to me. What I've realized going through life is that it's not self-evident to everybody at all.
Yeah.
And you still need to keep saying it. You still need to keep banging that particular drum, which is, it's sad, but it's also work that I feel like I'm equipped to do. So
I kept returning to that line, actually. The love has not made you clean, he said. No one who loves is filthy. It was something that I had to sit with for a while, actually. And I think it's the kind of thing that, for me at least, only poetry can really make me do that, can really make me reflect on these things in ways that are going to kind of get inside me and sort of, do that kind of work. Actually, I think I'd love more people to sit with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always my hope, and I think this is what I believe that poetry can do at its best: is it slows you down, and it forces you to sit in discomfort, because you have to take every sort of word at a time. You have to kind of progress through the lines bit by bit, and it's something about the form that is encouraging you to do that, and which is the antithesis of, the malignant rapidity of late stage capitalism that just wants to sort of like boom, boom, just absorb these horrible, noxious ideas as they fly at your face, and then you don't have to think about them at all. In however many characters you get on Twitter or whatever, yeah. And so it's sort of, I wanted it to be kind of like the opposite of that, and I hope that people do read it in that way, if people are reading it at all. I feel like it's you guys and my mum so far. But I'm hoping it's just it's a slow burner. It's a slow burner.
Yeah. I have actually told people. So I was making my mum read some of it last night. I was saying, "Oh well, we're interviewing this Fran Lock tomorrow, and I think you'd like this," because my mum's big into poetry as well. And yeah, she enjoyed. Obviously, I didn't get to read a whole lot of it, but so there's at least what, 4 of us, including your mum and my mum?
2 mums now.
2 mums. It's the rise of the mums.
I'm not holding out. I don't think my mum's into poetry, I'm afraid. So another thing that I Adam was saying, you had to sit with that particular line. The idea that I kind of had to stop and go, oh wow, that's really interesting, is you draw this kind of comparison between Jesus' ministry and death and Huey Newton's idea of revolutionary suicide, which I thought was such a striking thing. And you kind of do that in the introduction, and once you have that idea, certainly when I was reading it, because that idea struck me so much, it was really prominent in quite a lot of the poems, that idea. So I'd love you to just tell us a little bit more about that kind of idea and where it kind of comes from for you.
Yeah, so I can tell you exactly where I was. I was in Berlin for a poetry festival, and I was reading Huey Newton in the executive breakfast lounge. my Alpro yogurt.
That's where he was designed to be read. That's
That's
what he was
where exactly
expecting.
in the most white environment in the entire history of the universe. And I was trying to sort of like shut out and create a space just to focus on these words and reading him. And it sort of just it overwhelmed me as this wave that this could be Christ speaking. And it's the idea of like, sort of revolutionary death and suicide. It's not a sort of denial of life. It's an absolute, overwhelming, almost unbearable love of life and a desire for something better. It's not saying that the individual life doesn't matter or should be subordinated to an idea. It's precisely because each individual life is precious. And it's acknowledging that you might not get to the other end. You might not see the promised land yourself. You might suffer, but you are part of this coming change that is building this kind of force, and you're part of that incremental sort of slow process, that slow revolution. And also just the kind of the heaviness of the moral responsibility to know that something is right. It doesn't matter what's going to happen to you as a result. It's right. It's an act of service, and it's an act of love. And I was thinking about, kind of Christ in the temple. He challenged money and he challenged authority. And not only that, he had this humongous, huge popular support when he did it. It was a real show of kind of like, popular strength. And that led directly to his death. That, you challenge power, you challenge authority, you challenge money. That's what's going to happen to you. And the crucifixion was power, was money, was all of these, the law in its majesty pushing back to squash this person. But Mary Magdalene, what I love about Mary Magdalene is she's like, no, you think you killed him, that you didn't, because we all know, we saw you, we saw what you did, and we understood what he was doing, we understood Christ's message, and we will carry on that work. We're all these links in a chain. And I think, sort of reading Huey Newton in this extraordinarily white, posh space, and just realizing that these are his ideas, but these are also Christ's ideas. This is what Christ was saying. It's like, just, he's sort of like, and there's no one else there. I'm completely on my own. I'm sort of surrounded by sort of very strange members of the kind of like German police force who were there having some sort of conference. And I just wanted to run around and just share with them. We're like, guys, it's amazing. But I managed to restrain myself. And thus I'm here to tell the tale. But it was a sort of very kind of like profound, sort of overwhelming kind of moment. And then I was thinking about how then do I communicate that to other people in a way that isn't going to make me sound quite mad? And I thought the only form that is sort of capacious and muscular enough to do that is in a poem. It wouldn't, it's pointless my writing a really long essay. I will write something with that kind of like effective sort of immediacy to it, and hopefully be able to communicate that idea effectively, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely coming across in there. And I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I wondered if you wanted to pick a poem. I know that you'd had a few that you were kind of thinking about and making notes on that you wanted to talk about, so that the listeners don't have to keep listening to my dull voice going on.
Yeah, I mean, I can do. I've got a few that I picked out specifically. It was tricky because I enjoyed the whole collection, and I thought I liked the flow of it as well. But how you can read something, you can read poetry, and I was saying earlier that you sit with certain things, and then other things you're reading and it's sparking things off, here and there. And I got to regarding nature. And just the very first line of that, all of nature with its forms and creatures exist together, interwoven with each other. And then it sort of talks a lot about flowers and all the kind of constituent parts, which I really enjoyed. And it just, and the ending where it says, much yet to hope, much yet to learn. I wondered how much you had been thinking about things like the climate crisis in that, but also I always end up reading Rachel Carson, going back to, and she died in the 60s, but she was sort of one of these sort of fairly early kind of prophets of nature. I think she was a marine biologist, actually, but she wrote this wonderful book called I think it's called Man's War with Nature, where she has this fantastic line that I may butcher, where she says, man is a part of nature, so his war on nature is a war on himself. And just that really kind of came through for me in that poem. And I wondered, was that something that was sort of on your mind as well as you were writing that?
That's something that's never not on my mind. I have an enormous kind of bugbear about the sort of hygienic separation between man and nature, kind of capital M, where nature is only really meaningful in respect to what it can do for the human person that's observing it or looking at it, which completely failing to interrogate that actually you are also nature, my friend, and you live in nature, you are nature. It drives me absolutely, one of those things that just drives me absolutely wild. It's like a big Enlightenment hangover. I feel like we inherited this idea during the Enlightenment, and it's never gone away, and it probably should. But also I was reading a lot of Hildegard von Bingen, and all the kind of the mystics who are all like extraordinarily prescient on all of that, and the connection between the human soul and the human spirit in the natural world, and the idea that you can go into a wild space and you can learn something from it. It's not valuable because you can learn something from it, but it's an amazing teacher. Because I love going out. I love being outside. I like being outdoors. I'm a sort of avid hiker. And just wanting to be in that kind of that other space, away from people where possible. Just terrible thing for a kind of communist to say. Stay away from other humans. But yeah, sort of very much thinking about the sort of the violence that just that thought process does, and that we're never going to be able to make a positive change. We're never going to be able to rescue ourselves from this kind of like disaster we've dug ourselves into unless we can change that mindset, that separation, that thing that hides us off from the rest of the plant and animal kingdom.
It's that commodification of it as well that I think is really interesting, and actually how far back that thread goes, of associating money and capital and the exploitation of resources with nature. And I mean, I'm reminded of a story of St. Francis, where one of his brothers, as in not necessarily his actual brother, but one of the other friars, is really annoyed because someone comes and gives them money and puts this money on the altar, and he's so angry that someone's put money, this disgusting thing, on the altar, that he comes and he grabs the money and he throws it onto like a windowsill or something away from the altar. And St. Francis admonishes him, tells him off for touching money. And of course, St. Francis is well known, and the Franciscans are well known for their kind of love of nature and living things and so on as well. And I'm always amazed at how often that connection is actually made. That connection with money and nature is made. So it's always there. It
is, and I think it's worse now than it ever was. I think with the privatization of kind of forest spaces, and all these wonderful police crime sentencing bills to prevent you from accessing what was common land. It's the damage that begun with enclosure has never. I think enclosure, people tend to think about sort of learning history, kids at school, like, oh yeah, enclosure, that happened sometime in the 16 and 1700s, and then it finished. Like, no, it didn't. It's still ongoing.
I don't think they even teach that, to be honest. Most people I have discussions with about enclosure in this country, they have absolutely no idea. They just think, I think most people think that the way things are, the way land is used and owned, and that system of ownership and so on, it must be how it's always been. I think most people don't think back. I remember getting... Okay, this is very sad and shows my sort of weird anarchist kind of peevishness and so on. But I've had discussions with security guards who are very annoyed at the fact that I'm walking my dog on this disused land that they don't even, they but they own their company owns it, therefore I can't do it. And I'm like, who am I hurting here? You know, and that's, I wish more people would ask that question: who is hurting from this action, and is actually anyone benefiting from it? But I guess that brings us to foxes have holes, and I was sort of struck by a lot of that kind of language of, you know, hinting at enclosure and hostile architecture and that kind of thing. And I remember reading it on the train, and just sort of every so often, like, yes, people sort of looking up, like, what are you doing, mate? You know,
reading poetry. Shut up.
yeah. But yeah, it seemed to me sort of all about, you know, those with gatekeeping resources from those without, and how often they do that for no apparent good reason whatsoever, other than it feeds into the kind of hegemony of the system, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think people who they like to feel that they're occupying their wee kind of like gilded niche in the hierarchy, and that's for some reason incredibly important to them, because they've also inherited those structures of thought that goes along with the physical architecture. The kind of the thought process that goes with it is also an architecture that they've been kind of raised within. And I was thinking very much about, you know, the experiences of traveller people who now exist and have, I mean, really since the 1970s, have existed in this impossible position where you can't settle, so you're not allowed to stop anywhere, but you can't shift, so you're not allowed to move anywhere. So what are you going to do? It's assimilate or die is the logic.
Yes.
And then, well, where are you assimilated into? Well, your community, your family, your support network is divided up and scattered, you know, across sink estates. That's where you go, to a place where there's no job, where you're forced into this kind of subservient, kind of cap in hand position, for no other reason that your support network is gone because you no longer have a community. And I was also thinking about the absolute obscenity of how many houses there are in London that stand empty while people are forced to beg outside cash points and sleep on the street. Yeah. That they put spikes up to stop people from even doing that. Yeah. There used to be, so outside of Angel Tube Station, where the hot vent was, like, homeless people used to sleep there. They put the spikes down to stop them from doing that. Like, why? Why would you do that? Why would you do that to somebody? If somebody is freezing cold in the middle of winter, why would you prevent them from accessing something? It's not like you could monetize that heat. It's still just, it's not like you can use it for anything. It's not like it belongs to anybody. But you can't even allow those people to access that. And then the living here, because we're quite close to Napier Barracks, and it's gone very UKIP-y. They've kind of slithered into our dimension through a magic mirror after the last local election. There is this rhetoric against migrants and people who are fleeing absolutely terrible persecution or terrible hardship, just want a better life for themselves and their children. And the hatred. As if giving something to somebody decreases your lot rather than making you richer and wealthier. They can't seem to see that it's what I call like a competition ontology, right? Where everyone is like fighting each other for resources all the time. We're like, but if you share, then everything's nicer. And also you have this wider network of support where we can all help each other. Why is that such a radical thought? And why are some people so intent on denying everyone just the basics of existence, just the absolute?
Well, the thing is, Fran, Napier Barracks is a 5-star hotel, and they're putting these immigrants up in 5-star hotels when I can't even afford to pay the rent. So. But no, in all seriousness,
so I'm just going to get like incoherent with rage if we carry on talking about
this. I know, but what I will say though, very quickly, which I will never tire of saying whenever Napier Barracks comes up, I have personally stayed at Napier Barracks when it was still commissioned for the army. I wasn't in the army, but I did stay there for reasons, and it wasn't fit for purpose then. It was falling apart. It was crumbling. It was cold. It was horrible. So anyone who thinks that they're putting people in 5-star hotels is living in cloud cuckoo land. And if they were putting them in 5-star hotels, bloody good.
Mm.
You know,
Yes.
frankly.
Absolutely.
So we'll take a pause there on talking about the book, and we'll come back to it in a minute. But before we talk about it some more, Adam, I believe that you have a Saint of the Week for us.
Saint of the week.
I do, yeah. So we are going to talk about someone who was very much not an official saint of the church, but was an ordained Roman Catholic priest.
And a person.
And an actual human being.
Okay, Adam's
I know,
brought a dog
I
to
know.
this before, so you got to check.
Look, the dog. You agreed that the dog was a
It
saint.
was a cool
okay?
dog. Yeah, I'm down with it. I just, it's good to clarify what we're dealing with here.
So I'm talking today about Thomas Hagerty. I don't know if you've come across that name before, but Thomas Hagerty was a co-founder of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World Trade Union. And he had finished seminary training to be a priest in 1895. So he was born in 1862, finishes his training in 1895, and spends a good few years working as a priest in Las Vegas. But all through that time, he's pretty radical, and he's becoming steadily more radical. And he starts to say things that begin to get him into trouble with the church, to the point where they end up kind of kicking him out. Now, he's not excommunicated. He is, and he's still a priest, because you can't, once you're ordained, you're, in the eyes of God, you're a priest for life. It's just that they're not going to pay him to be a priest, right? And during this time, he starts taking up a lot more radical kind of socialist, anarchist kind of work. And he's known to be a really, really powerful orator. So he will talk at these huge meetings. And in the early 1900s, he co-founds with some more famous, sort of well-known names. He co-founds the IWW. Now, there's not a whole lot written about Thomas Hagerty. He's not super well known. Most people haven't heard of him. Most people don't know. Even on the IWW website, he's kind of just briefly mentioned as a co-founder. They don't talk about him a whole lot. But of course, you've got people like Eugene Debs, who, kind of had a relationship with Christianity as well. And this is, I think, something that, aside of the IWW, that people don't often see, that it has its origins in sort of this very sort of radical Christian thought, whereas now we kind of see it as a sadly much diminished, but still very, very radical sort of anarcho-syndicalist-ish trade union. But it's co-founded by this guy. Now, he considers himself, he has a quote, he says, "While it is true that I have withdrawn from the technical work of the ministry," this is so wonderfully so wonderfully spoken, "the withdrawal implies no derogation of my sacerdotal character. I am as much a priest today as I ever was. I have not separated myself from the communion of the Catholic Church, and I hold myself as much a member thereof as the Pope himself." So I love that kind of, there's a hint of fuck you to that, I think, and I enjoy that. I always enjoy a hint of fuck you. Now he did talk sometimes about, now we've just got a new Pope, of course. We've got Pope Leo XIV. And Pope Leo XIV has essentially named himself after Pope Leo XIII. And the idea, as we know at this point, is that he's trying to nod towards some of that social gospel, that Catholic social teaching element that was fairly key to Leo XIII's ministry. What people don't often talk about is that a big part of Pope Leo XIII's talking about Catholic social teaching and labour rights and that kind of thing is that he was trying to head off the sort of Marxist, anarchist, socialist threat, right? And so by taking this head on and saying, no, well, I do agree with all of this, Hagerty was kind of pushing back on a lot of that. What's interesting, though, is that So we will often, on this podcast, we will often be trying to bring socialism of various forms and Christianity together, and to say that Christianity really has this socialist kernel at its heart, right? This is not what Hagerty does. Hagerty says that, no, the two are separate. You can't stop me being a socialist because that's got nothing really to do with Christianity. They're two different things, dealing with two. And I was so fascinated by this because I haven't really come across Christians who are socialists who approach it in that way. But I think that's the unique position of being a Catholic, a member of Catholic clergy, especially at this time where they're having these conversations and where it's become, I think it's just at this point become, you can't, as far as they're concerned, be a Catholic and a Marxist. So he's really trying to separate those two things. The sad thing is that after 1905, he suddenly disappears. Not disappears entirely, like people knew where he was, but he just withdrew from all his ministry stuff, all of church stuff, and all of his political stuff. And nobody really knows why. He withdrew from all his friendships. He, just completely went off the radar, really. And it sounds, I could be wrong, but it sounds to me like it all became too much. Like he had a breakdown. And you can see why, because he was getting it from all angles. He spent the remaining years of his life living homeless, living rough, living largely on Chicago's Skid Row, and in complete poverty, getting his food from soup kitchens and so on, and begging. And nobody knows when he died. The best we've got is that this is a quote, he probably died sometime in the late 1920s. So it's a tragic tale, but he had a couple of years of just intense kind of socialist fervor, and then he burnt out, and I think, there's probably a lesson for us all to remember there. I think, look after your comrades and give yourself and each other time and space, and don't expect too much of each other, and work together, work hard together. It's not all about individuals. So that's your saint of the week, Thomas Hagerty.
Thomas Hagerty. Oh, I feel for him. I feel his pain.
I agree. I'd heard of him before, but the whole thing about the complete separation of Christianity and socialism, as you say, it's kind of almost the polar opposite of the project that we've been trying to do here. But it's almost a fascinating way of threading that needle and basically saying to the church, well, you can't touch me. It's almost quite, I don't know how tactical it was, but it is an effective tactic, right? That says, well, actually, this has nothing to do with you, so you can't touch me on this. But very different to how we have tended to approach that sort of question.
And you can see why he would do that as well. And clearly it didn't work, sadly. And I think that's probably why it's so important that there are movements now to reclaim that, liberation theology to a greater or lesser extent, and people who operate sort of beyond the bounds of liberation theology to say, no, actually, there is a lot of overlap here at the very least. And I think that's probably whilst I obviously clearly respect what Thomas Hagerty was trying to do, I think he was trying to deal with the things that were being thrown at him, and it didn't work. And I think now we have to say, no, Christianity is at least as much ours as it is anyone else's.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm feeling for him. I'm just feeling for Hagerty, and I think it must be a terrible thing to try to separate, because I can't imagine in his own mind, and that the two things were mutually exclusive. And to have to force that wedge psychologically must have been a terrible pressure. To know something in your bones, but have to sort of perform kind of, strategically. Otherwise must have been extremely, extremely hard and extremely, extremely sad.
Yeah. And as someone who was until fairly recently training for ordained ministry, it's a really, really hard thing to juggle, that kind of thing of trying not to piss off the wrong people, but also trying to be true to the ideals that you truly believe are part of that gospel message as well. It's a very, very hard line to tread.
And if we're honest, Adam, it's not a line you trod very well, because you definitely pissed off a lot of the wrong people.
Yeah, that is true. Look, officially, that is not why they booted me out. So,
so thank you for that, Adam. That was really interesting to hear more about Thomas Hagerty, and a very sad ending. I'm gonna counter the slightly sad mood here, because I want to talk about what I think is probably my favourite line in the book, which is from the poem "And My Soul Sang," which is about essentially Mary Magdalene encountering a post-resurrection Jesus. I think it's an absolutely beautiful poem, but there's this line in it which is Jesus saying to Mary Magdalene, "They cannot win, those loveless fucks, so whist your grief." And partly, partly just because, I like both my Christianity and my poetry with a bit of swearing in. But I also think, actually loveless fucks is such a evocative way of phrasing it. You spoke quite movingly earlier about love and, orienting yourself towards a love of life. And I think actually loveless fucks is a really evocative way of describing, I guess, what we call our enemies, right? The people who are both fucks, but live without love, cannot bring themselves to love, truly. I think that whole poem is wonderful, but I found that very inspiring, the kind of they can't win. And I'll be honest, I had to Google whist, because I didn't know that, but really enjoyed, whist your grief.
That's tricky.
But lovely. I think my favourite line in the book, that one.
Yeah, we like a bit of swearing, and I think it's just, but it's also just that, that it's almost like the most basic kind of like, idiomatic way that you can put it, right? It's because they are, and you think everything that they do, and sort of watching kind of like Reform Watch I'm on down here, living here now, and you sort of just watch the things that they come out with it, and the thing a person who was living with love, a person who had experienced and known in their heart what it was, not as this kind of like mingily little kind of like privatized experience where, you have affection for, a pet or your partner in a sort of weird possessive sort of way, but love as in something that is embracive and generous. And anyone that's really experienced that wouldn't say the things they said and wouldn't do the things they did. And the problem with it is, sort of living without love, you are just a sort of a husk, you are just a shell, you are this closed loop. That's all you'll ever be, because you can't connect to anything. And you go through the world with like your central nervous system switched off. You don't touch life, and life doesn't touch you. And so, I mean, you can't win, because you're just barren seed. That's all you are. It's, And I find that just to live in the world at the moment, I have to believe that. I feel like I really desperately need that to be true. And I struggle with it. Some days I believe it more fervently than others. But I really believe that, because you can't, because nothing grows on the sort of the barren ground that they have in lieu of a heart or in lieu of a soul. Because if there was anything in there, they couldn't do the things they do. And I think that love, it's not just this thing that we feel. It's like it's an unprecedented kind of like moral movement. Right, it can be this sort of revolutionary force. It's what gets things done. It's what, kind of like all the good that's in the world. Anything that's, anyone's ever achieved that's been amazing or wonderful, any great work of art that's ever been created, any sort of wonderful poem that's ever really moved anyone, any piece of music, the thing that's done that is love. Anytime somebody's helped their fellow man or their fellow creature, or planted a tree or opened a community garden, it's love that's done that, right? What's hate done? What's, selfishness and greed ever actually made that was good. Yeah, that's where I was with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that really comes through. I think that's what makes it such a powerful line.
It also reminds me a lot of so one of my favorite poems is The Needle Trick, and obviously it's alluding to where Jesus is saying that it's harder for a rich man to enter heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. But it also reminded me a lot of James 5 as well. You know, come now, you rich people, weep and wail for the miseries that are coming to you. You know, it's wonderful chapter, really, book entirely, actually. But I think one of the things I loved about this poem and about other poems as well was how much information you managed to pack into a single poem. How many accusations these people have to stand against. Things like the black oblong boxes somewhere. Sorry, I've got it in front of me, but I can't find the exact bit. Like the sensorial boxes where they're redacting from reports and so on. There was so much from that just, for me, beautifully correlated the functions of capital with the causes of war and of poverty and of starvation, and especially the kind of it was evocative of the missing limbs that was seared in our brains from the ongoing genocide in Palestine. There's, sorry if that you can hear, that's my dog. But yeah, no, I think we have, and anyone with a heart who owns a screen has images seared into their mind that they will never forget from the last couple of years of Israeli genocide against the Palestinian people. And this very, very poignantly and pointedly made that plain, I thought.
I mean, I think what I'm trying to do with that poem, kind of it's sort of to get out all of that. That capitalism is this sort of like the originating wound. It's like this big structure of sin from which all other evils kind of spread, and that also that it is a wound, that it is damaging, and it's damaging to the people who are doing it as much as it is to the people who are just the victims of it. Everybody is not equally damaged by it, but everyone is damaged by it where it touches them. And I think, sort of having lived with kind of, the situation in Palestine, which is, you've got two responses to that, I think, haven't you? You either numb yourself and you switch yourself off so you're no longer seeing it. So you don't have to feel because it's so daily and the inundation is so intense, or you sort of force yourself to sit with it and feel it and remain open. And then every day becomes a fresh occasion to say, well, okay, well, what usefully can I do today that might help? Even if it's just sharing information, pushing that information to somebody who might not have seen it, who might not know. Even if that's all you're doing, you can do one tiny thing, one small effort.
And it correlates, I think, with the kind of bit towards the end about, look us in the eye. If you're going to screw us, or in this case, if you're going to murder Palestinians, look us in the eye, because there's it's the demand to be heard, and the demand for, okay, well, you might do this to us, but we will have our dignity in that. And I also recognize in my own language, as I say this, that I'm using the word our as if I identify, I am one of the people who, is being victimized by this. And in some respects, as you say, we all are, but there's, it's interesting, I think, how we read that as well, and we always read ourselves, I think, as the goodies.
Yeah, you really want to, don't you? I think you kind of you need to. But I think, when I talk about, sort of use kind of like we and our in the poem as well, it's a way of being in solidarity. And it's not about appropriating or claiming another person's experience for your own. It's about saying that I'm sort of standing with you and standing behind you, that you are not alone. Those who suffer, nobody is alone in suffering. We are a compassionate commons and community. And anything that damages one of us damages all of us, which is why we need to stand up and to be angry.
Good IWW, injury to one and it is an injury to all.
Injury to all. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's never been improved upon, that that kind of formulation. I don't think it's it's something that I sort of try to bear in mind every day, and sort of thinking about what can I do? What can I do to get in people's faces and just bang that particular drum?
But I love this idea of the what you call the votive logic of commerce as well. And obviously, it's bringing ideas of mammon, the kind of almost the worship of money, of wealth, of the accumulation of resources, really, far more than you need. And I think it can be a really helpful framing device for, when we think about commerce, what is actually going on when we buy and sell, and how we buy and sell, and that kind of thing, to see that as a potential god in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think it's I find that it's only something that's got worse as I've got older that I notice now that. And because it is bled, I think capitalism is bled into spirituality, what we call spirituality. This my friend calls it the wellness to woo pipeline. This kind of like yes, and you can buy and cherry pick kind of a spiritual experience or a spiritual tradition. It's become so very naked that it's actually capitalism itself is this kind of like perverse form of kind of like ritualistic kind of experience. It's a form of worship that people don't really realize that they're engaging in. So what are you worshiping? What is this thing that you're putting on a pedestal? Because it has no existence on its own. It's just stuff. I was reading something the other day, and somebody, I can't even remember what the context was, but somebody in this article I was reading had paid £88,000 for a car. I mean, it doesn't make you a sandwich. It's not made of solid gold. It just does the same thing as all cars do. There's a finite number of functions that thing can execute, right? And they had this money, and they genuinely thought that the best use of all this wealth that they'd hoarded and accumulated was to buy this vehicle. And this is one of the things that I find very difficult to reconcile myself to about the world, is that there are people out there living their lives that think this is an acceptable thing to do. And it's all about that status, and it's all about money, and it's hoping if I can be near to money and I can accumulate enough money, like some of its magic, some of its luster will rub off on me. And then I can be sort of like, I can indemnify myself against death or feeling bad, or it will adhere to me like a positive spiritual and moral quality. And then I'll just be able to coast through life and it'll be great. And, at some point, I feel like the world needs an intervention. Somebody needs to step in and say, that doesn't work. What are you doing? You are a crazy person at this point. You've crossed the line. And yet it's sort of really striking and interesting to me that it's those who choose to live without the trappings of money, those people who choose to go off grid, who choose to walk away from like capitalist society, that are treated like the nutters. I'm like, no, this whole thing is profoundly irrational and not in a good way. So yeah, I sort of think that money is, and it's replaced all other forms for a lot of people of spiritual exercise. Of the reaching and the yearning that should be like the core of faith. It's going towards this horrid, abstract, nasty thing instead.
You've only got to look at how much meditation and yoga and things like that have been commodified, haven't you?
Oh, it's madness. It's absolute. I really struggle with it. I sort of think that any spiritual practice that is charging you money to participate is not really worthy of the name. And it saddens me that so many extremely intelligent people I know, lovely, lovely people who are otherwise very, very smart, very switched on, have been sucked into this this sphere where they're buying healing crystals and they're paying £50 for someone to tell them how to go in the correct way. And it just makes me feel extremely sad inside. You don't have a great deal. These are not people who are wealthy either. These are people who don't have a lot of money to begin with. I think it points to a great spiritual hunger. And I think it also points to the kind of the failure of imagination capitalism kind of like breeds in us, where it becomes our best idea. We'll just throw money at this. And and see if that'll solve the problem, because it's worked really well so far. We're all doing super.
I think it's one of, I've said this before, but actually, if you're a religious or spiritual person, I think you have to, or you should take very seriously that Marx line. You know, opiate the people gets quoted all the time, but you know, I can't remember the top, but is it the sigh of the oppressed creature, or you know, and actually the subtlety of that critique. You know, I think it's only been proved more right when, as you say, you have these spiritual practices that are deeply capitalist, but also represent people trying to express something beyond the strictures of capitalism, right? And I think, yeah, I know that is by some kind of, should we say, unsophisticated leftists used as like a bat to hit religious people with, but actually I think there is a real depth and sophistication to that critique that demands to be taken seriously, even if you know, as I do, choose to continue to have some sort of religious faith. You have to deal with the opiate of the people, because it's a critique that's actually only become more prescient as time has gone by, I think.
Well, it's a critique of religion, but it's a critique of capitalism as well, right? And actually within that, there's something quite, you know, I talked earlier about how I kind of enjoyed the gentleness of, you know, your introduction, or your foreword. I can't remember which it was, but there's actually something quite gentle in Marx's critique there as well. You know, he is sort of acknowledging a positive element of what religious faith does for people in such a fucked up world.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of, it's in it, and it's beyond, I think it's beyond sort of like merely consoling and sort of like, you know, giving you the tool to sort of carry on and endure your terrible sort of reality. It's a way of kind of being in communion with the suffering of others and feeling part of something. I mean, that's something that I really like about, you know, the lives of saints. I'm slightly obsessed with the lives of saints and with the concept of saintly intercession, because it's a way of sort of, you know, it's being with a community of other people, suffering others who are like yourself, and kind of being held in that. And sometimes that's the only community you've got. You have this imaginative spiritual community because you don't have a real one. That's the reality for a lot of working class people, I think, under capitalism. And so I like that kind of formulation of Marx. I like that, you know, the sort of idea that faith and spirituality and religion is a form of holding and of being with one another. It answers a need that we have, a kind of hunger that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could probably keep going and go through every poem in turn and talk about it for hours yet. But for the sake of both our listeners and ourselves, who probably have to, you know, get on with the rest of our lives at some point, we will draw things to a close there. We didn't even get to touch on the wonderful poem that riffs on the Communist Manifesto and finishes with the line, the spectre of communism, kid, the spectre is here. And if you want to hear the rest of that poem, you need to go get the book, because it's fantastic. I also really enjoyed Beatitudes and Woes, a pair of poems that start with blessings, but then, rather than doing that meek liberalism, really lay into some people who need telling about their woes.
It's great. The woes are what make the blessings, you know. So yeah, I think you need both, don't you?
Yeah. So really fantastic. Fran, I did not warn you about this, so feel free to say no. But what I would like to do, if you're up for it, is we'll do our kind of ending stuff, and then I would like, if you are up for it, if we could close with you just reading one of your poems, and you can pick whichever one you think you'd like to share. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
So we will do our usual ending, and then we will leave you with one of Fran's wonderful poems. So thank you very much for listening, everyone. It is a pleasure as always. Fran, obviously, the book, the link is in the in description to this. That's a reminder to Adam as well when he uploads it to put a link in. if people want to find out more about you, keep up with you, or find out more about kind of Culture Matters stuff, where should they look?
Mainly just the Culture Matters website. I'm a social media free zone, but you can find my writing and the writing of like many of our other wonderful comrades and contributors on the Culture Matters website.
I have both a respect and an element of jealousy that you are social media free. That is, it has done incalculable damage to my brain and probably continues to do so. So a very sensible choice, I think.
My only one.
Yeah. Adam, you are not a social media free zone. Where can people find you doing damage to your brain?
Well, I try to do damage to other people's brains through social media, to be honest. So, but yeah, you can find me TikTok, Blue Sky, probably Instagram. I forget which. At CommieXIAN.
And all the details, contact staff are on the website, breadandrosaries.com. Do get in touch with us. First of all, to tell Adam you know what a tribble is. And then, more importantly, any feedback, thoughts, questions, ideas. We really like hearing from people, really like kind of having a two-way conversation rather than us just shouting to the void. So do get in contact. There's Patreon details as well if you want to throw us some pennies so we can keep hosting this malarkey. Other than that, we will say goodbye and leave you with Fran reading us a poem. Thanks for listening, everyone.
So I'm going to read The Ghost in Our House. For love is stronger than death. There is a spectre haunting the pores in our plain song. That which exceeds meaning, the meaning that exceeds ourselves, battered but abiding. There is a ghost in our house, in our sullen government of tongues, tombs, tomes, as strong as and stronger than death. That which persists and that which returns, do not be afraid. The spectre is not our omen or our afterburn, it is the indivisible quick, the clarifying fire of us redoubled into turbulence and thunder. There is a spectre haunting the tread and breath of dawn, all our bright week watches through, in night sweats and small wonders, convenes its fevers in the mind. A ghost is neither winged nor wreathed, nor Thrawn's fable's witching thing, no taboo totem copf of thin insurgencies. Ghosts enter between the staves and stresses, in riled splendour rising in the throat. Seek it, however, in pericope or perspiration, in lectionary light or aggie threat, in neumes, in names, in rooms, in memes. Its voice is joy, its silence strategy. Sing it, and it is singing. Its song summons solidarity. It is the signet and the sovereign, the seal austerely set, a spectre, I said, inside of and beyond what these our mealy mouths vouchsafe, the body and the breath, dull cant and dulcet canticle, words and more than words, the schmaltz and mirage of memory. There is a spectre haunting humankind, no sabled stunt with sheets and chains, no plagial third, no parvane step, no gauntly, loitering spook house shade. There is something stirring, up, from the room and stupor of lean decades, no meanly gospelled grievance, nothing about it savours of the grave. For this is as strong and stronger than death, not by force and not by fear. The spectre of communism. Kid, the spectre is here.